Hello and welcome. I am Ben the Best 5 and I am coming at you with yet more Kerbal Space Program content. Now, some of you who are some of my more, long-term viewers might recognize this rocket because it is one of my first ever rockets. In fact, for my first ever series, my series was just so, I was so new at YouTube I didn't even have a name for it. It was just my hello, I'm doing YouTube. Anyway, this is a revisit because in that video I launched, some theoretical, titanium rods, and I said that they could be used, to drop on people. However, I never actually did, launch them at the ground. See what happened when the supposed weapon, kinetic rods, tungsten rods, were deployed. So I figured, well, since I am going through and revisiting all my videos, I felt, weren't necessarily, or could go somewhere, or weren't necessarily completed. I figured that this was a great, video to cover, just simply because, well, I was kind of always curious to see what would happen if these rods were deployed and sent hurtling towards the ground. So that's what this video is about. This first little section is just me replaying playing a launch, because I launched a brand new set of rods for this mission. So here I am, just it's interesting footage to talk over while I was, preparing doing an intro, I guess. And yes, so I'm just gonna quickly point retrograde and set the rods so that they're on a D-orbit path, and then from that point I just let them, hit the atmosphere, and then I let go of them, deploy them into the air. Basically, you see what would happen. What would happen when, giant, massive tungsten rods are launched from orbit at the ground. And yes, I wanted to point prograde when I deployed the rods, just simply because the launcher is going to be more aerodynamically resistant than the actual rods themselves, so it would get pulled behind. So as a result of it being pulled behind, I wanted it behind. However, if it was, more aerodynamic than the rods, I'd put it in front. However, that is, well, preposterous, because, well, rods are narrow and thin, whereas the base is a bit wider, plus it has these solar panels sticking out, which are only one way deployable. Yes, deploying the rods. So from the initial deploy, I was actually a bit intrigued, because they appear to actually be bunching up instead of splitting apart, which is in fact the opposite of what I expected. I expected them to kind of do the opposite. But then what they did next really surprised me, was they started to rotate and spin. You can see here, in the aero resistance, they're actually spinning upwards and, well, rotating around themselves, and then colliding into each other, which is what's going to cause them to eventually spread apart, is this kind of rotation here. In fact, that's the same kind of rotation that SpaceX gives their Starlink satellites when it deploys them. However, they are a lot smaller, so they don't bump into each other like these ones do. But yes, these rods, yes, they're just bumping into each other here, and yeah, in fact they've already spun 180, which is very, very interesting, because I really did not think that the rods like this would do that. I thought that if they were pointing prograde, and since they're balanced on our side, right, so they're the same width the whole way through, which means that they shouldn't have a bias towards either pointing prograde or retrograde. They should have a bias towards both, because both sides are basically at the front. And yeah, so I found that really interesting. In fact, they're still rotating through the atmosphere, and I actually don't have an explanation for that. If someone in the comments, is really good with their aerodynamic laws, if you can explain to me why perfectly, balanced, symmetrical rods will rotate when exposed to the atmosphere like that, then please let me know. I'd actually be interested to know. Anyway, another thing that surprised me is how they weren't pulling themselves is the directions they were moving in. Because as you can see here, there are kind of two on the right which didn't necessarily start there. It's not just the camera angle, they are actually drifting in that direction, and especially the one at the top is pointing in a weird direction. Yeah, it's this one, as you can see here. It's not pointing in the same direction as all the rest of them, which, found kind of interesting. Here's me just switching between them so that, I can get a good look at them, and so you guys can all get a good look of them falling. Rather, interestingly, because they're not all falling in the same way. I figured that since they were all the same shape and were released at the same point, they'll in fact all fall at the same rate and at the same location and stuff, but no. And also one of them, or two of them now, have started to get their reentry plasma build up around them, but none of the others have, which I found was quite interesting. Some quite, abnormal, I guess you could say, behaviors for the objects. Maybe it's just Kerbal Space Program not handling aerodynamic forces properly, or what, I don't know. In fact, I could have turned on the aerodynamic overlay, but I actually just didn't think of it in time, because that would have actually been fascinating, because it showed me some stuff. And also another really interesting thing is, I figured that the rods would even out and have all the small ends pointing towards the ground, but no, they're in fact doing the exact opposite. They are basically moving like an upright knife almost through the atmosphere, with their largest possible face actually facing the atmosphere. Again, I have absolutely no idea why they are doing this. However, I suspect it's actually related to the same phenomena which caused them to flip about twice end over end when I launched them. Also, I'm not sure if this is accurate to reality or not. So these rods, in reality they would be tungsten, just because that's what my research tells me this kind of weapon would be built out of. However, in Kerbal Space Program they are built out of probably aluminium or carbon composite carbon composite structures, because they are actually fuel tanks filled with fuel in disguise, because there isn't actually tungsten rods in game, because that'd just be silly. Anyway, but we are seeing a heating issue where these rods are heating, and these are materials which are specifically designed to undergo aerodynamic stress, re-entry, etc., things like that, and come out fine. For example, it's the same stuff which space shuttles were built out of, and so long as the external heat paneling on those is not compromised, it should be alright. So yes, so I do wonder, seeing this, if something like tungsten, which isn't specifically developed to handle heat and be really strong like that, would be able to perform something. So would actually a weapon like that, if built in reality, would work, or if it would just melt. anyway, I find it so fascinating that it is re-entering the way it is, with all of them in the same direction. And yeah, now we see some fireworks actually. But yeah, they're all heating up at the same rate, and they're all facing the same direction. Yeah. Really anyway, this is what happens if you send rods through the atmosphere. Or kinetic bombardment rods, if you're going to be fancy. That was split in half. So, one half of that one must have, somehow heated up quicker than the rest, which is really unusual, And here we actually have one which is kind of not entering completely at anything. Anyway, so that's all of the rods disintegrated. Apparently if you did try and re-enter them all, they would disintegrate. Which I must say, it is rather disappointing, because I secretly did want to see them smash into the ground, because, well, that's cool. And, well, yeah. However, it is definitely interesting and fascinating just to see how something like this would happen, just because it's not something you'd regularly, do on Kerbal Space Program. It's definitely a bit of a once-off kind of extravagant thing, if you will. But anyway, now we are treated to some wonderful and rare shots of Kerbin, just simply because you wouldn't normally be able to get such a fine shot, but since, the thing's destroyed, the camera's gone silent, so we can have a look over, Kerbin's quite actually, nice mountains, and I can give you a nice outro where I thank you for watching my content, and I tell you to click one of the links on the screen, because that's a great way if you want to see more of my content. You should also subscribe to me, hit the notification bell, like the video, and leave a comment, if you want to interact with me, and especially if you have an answer to the weird behavior we saw. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you liked it. See ya. Goodbye.